Okay, so a funny little story here. I'm caught up with DC Rebirth for the most part, and I'm caught up with all new, all different Marvel, at least the titles that interest me anyway. And I was gonna move on to indie comics, but I was like, well, I mean, is there anything from Marvel or DC that I haven't read yet? And I was going through my pull list, and I came across DC Bombshells, and I was like, that's right, I have this on my pull list, and I've never read it. For me, as Comics Explained, because of the fact that my channel, like my source of employment is literally going over comics, I buy all the comics that come out from Marvel and DC in terms of like the top shelf ones, and then I get a few here and there who are sort of like outliers that people wouldn't normally watch or people wouldn't normally read or something like that, but I get them just because they seem kind of cool. And DC Bombshells is one of those. Now, the funny thing is, DC Bombshells, I believe, originally started off as like posters. Like it just started off as like these reimaginings of this sort of like 1940s, comic book characters, usually focusing on women. For the most part, it only really focused on women, which is why it's called Bombshells, but it was the most popular women that DC had. So like Wonder Woman and Harley Quinn and so on. And it's like, what would Harley Quinn look like if she existed in the 1940s with the whole 1940s appearance and the whole nine yards? The posters turned into statues and collectibles, which in turn turned into a comic book line. The statues and collectibles for DC Bombshells are stupid popular. Like, it's crazy how much people love those things, and rightfully so. They are beautifully designed. Like, they look absolutely amazing. I thought about getting a few of them here and there, but I've never really gotten around to it. But the DC Bombshells line is designed to basically be like this digital series. So it's a lot like Injustice, but it's designed to be this series that basically focuses on the story of the DC Bombshells characters. These characters that, went from posters to collectibles to the actual comic itself. And the first three issues are basically called Enlisted. And what those do is those basically deal with the introductions or the origin stories of the characters that are most likely going to be part of the DC Bombshells line. And then of course from there, it goes into a story, and then it picks up with new origins as new characters are introduced, and really just kind of expands on its own. Right now, it's like issue 96 or something crazy like that. Like, it's been going on for a while. But this one picks up with Batwoman. Now, one thing I want to point out to you guys is that there really is no like Batman, there's no Superman, at least, well, not in the early days anyway. The way that this origin story is done with Batwoman is it kind of hints on the idea of Bruce Wayne. Like in this particular instance, it really opens up with the idea of two parents leaving Zora with their son, and then somebody, runs up and tries to rob them, and Batwoman jumps to the rescue with her baseball bat and rescues the family. Batman in the traditional sense, basically all the characters that we're used to, we don't really see here. Instead, what DC does is actually pretty genius. They really kind of nestle this story right into the niche of 1940s society, in the sense that when World War II was ramping up, World War I, World War II, the home front was basically taken care of by women. That's where Rosie the Riveter came from and all those different things. The guys were fighting overseas. The guys were in the military. They were on the front lines, the invasion of Normandy and all that kind of good stuff. They were doing all that. Back in the States, women were taking up manufacturing jobs, and women were taking up, a lot of the roles that would normally be reserved for men, because somebody had to keep the country running. And so again, it was really kind of a cool scenario. But what this does is it sort of capitalizes on that, and it says, okay, at this moment, there's no Batman, there's no Superman. I mean, presumably they're off doing their own thing. This is an alternate universe story, so they may not exist at all. But at the very least, it really focuses more on the female aspect of this. Now, the funny thing about Kane is that there are a lot of things that they maintain in this alternate reality 1940s story about her character that really kind of goes into the roots of her New 52 origin. Because remember, this came out in around 2011 or so. And so the idea was that if DC was doing a line-wide reboot, it wouldn't make any sense to write a story called Bombshells and then relate the characters to their classic DC roots. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. And so instead, we effectively get this kind of, New 52 origin-esque sort of situation, in the sense that it's not the exact same, but some of the things are pretty similar. Now, one of the other cool things here is that in this instance, because of the fact that because of the fact there's no real like Batman per se, there really isn't a, Kane being like the traditional Batwoman with the cloak and the cowl and all that kind of good stuff. Instead, she's called the Batwoman because she wields a baseball bat. And the other cool thing is, of course, she's on like the local, the Gotham women's softball team, or baseball team rather, and that kind of good thing, and, has her own teammates and so on and so forth. But she basically tries to stop crime where she can, fight crime where she can. But it's really sort of fun here, because in this particular situation, there's a handful of people who try to rob the spectators. Why you would think it's a good idea to rob spectators at a baseball game with a few thousand people watching, I have no earthly clue. You think those few thousand people would just beat the absolute crap out of those 7 guys and the problem would be solved. But at the end of the day, Kane jumps in, throws her baseball, takes this guy out. But the real meat and potatoes of all this really comes in the form of Maggie Sawyer. Now, Maggie Sawyer has a very, very lengthy history. She was a John Byrne creation, I believe, and I believe it was Superman #4, like the Man of Steel. After Crisis on Infinite Earths, for those of you guys who don't know, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, John Byrne came along and wrote like a 6-issue miniseries called The Man of Steel, which basically detailed the new origin of Superman after Crisis on Infinite Earths. And I believe that Maggie Sawyer was rolled in as part of that new origin. origin, just being a member of the Metropolis PD. But over time, and especially getting into the New 52, she was more involved with Kane because, of course, again, Kane has an alternate lifestyle. And so the idea is that the two of them were basically paired together. Now, one of the cool things is that in the mainline New 52 comics, which is to say in the main DC universe, Kane and Maggie Sawyer went together insofar that Maggie Sawyer would basically try to cover up, or at least would try to help Kane with their various escapades as Batwoman, in the sense that Maggie Sawyer would provide inside information. She'd let her know about the goings on of the Gotham City Police Department, or she'd tell them, you know, hey, here's an investigation that we're doing, or here's a lead on a case that you're working, or whatever the case may be. But she would be the police help in the same way that Jim Gordon was the police help for Batman. Maggie Sawyer did the same thing for Batwoman. The cool thing about this, though, is that in this DC Bombshells landscape, the two are still very much together. They're still very much a couple, which is actually good to see, because I feel like the role that Batwoman plays, that Kane plays, you know, one, in having an alternative lifestyle, which grants some measure of empowerment, and two, her just kind of, you know, being Batwoman, I'm glad to see that kind of thing is maintained. The interpersonal relationships still stay the same, because it creates a measure of familiarity, right? Like, we don't feel like we're reading something so wholly removed from everything that we know that it might as well not even be called DC Comics. It could be called anything else. It's good to see that we don't have that. Everything is still intact. Everything is still held together, you know, by the glue that is continuity reboots. I have no idea. But in terms of her origin, all we're really told, or at least all we really know, is that she's basically taken over Kane Enterprises. She's basically the one running the show. But the problem with this, from her perspective, is that Kane Enterprises is very much involved in the war effort. Now, that makes sense, because that's the way it was during World War II. World War II, and you may have heard this phrase before, but World War II is what's referred to as a total war effort. And what that means is that all facets of American society are part of the war effort. Everything goes into it. If you are a company that makes nylon stockings, well, you're not making nylon stockings anymore, you're making parachutes. If you're a company that builds cars, well, you're not building cars anymore, you're building tanks. That's the whole total war effort that went into it. Some of it was government regulated, not a whole lot. Most of it was, hey, look, it's just kind of what we have to do because it's a literal threat to our way of life. Plus, there was a lot of profiteering, a lot of money in that, you know, a lot of incentives that went into it. There were a lot of politics on the backside of World War II. It's kind of crazy. I once read a book called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, I think is what it was called. Details the rise and fall of Nazi Germany on that end, and then there's all different kinds of stuff. But anyway, the fact remains, with regards to Kane Enterprises, the company that Kane is effectively leading, it's part of the total war effort. And so what that means is that all the resources of the company that she runs are geared towards the war effort. They're geared towards, you know, arms and armament. They're geared towards planes and tanks and all kinds of good stuff. And so the result is that despite the fact that the company is successful and it's doing its job, ultimately she feels like she's not doing hers. And that really kind of goes to the crux of the nature of superheroes, right? Because the great thing about DC Bombshells is it has this sort of Rockstar's LA Noire. I don't know how many of you guys played LA Noire. I love that game. But it has a kind of feel between Rockstar's LA Noire and Sucker Punch and like the golden age feel of superheroes all kind of rolled into one. We get the LA Noire feel just because of the era and time in which this takes place. I mean, LA Noire, I think, was more in the 1950s, maybe the early to mid 1940s. Golden age of superheroes was in the 1940s, and we get that feel in the sense of this is right, this is wrong, there is no in between. Either I'm doing the right thing or I'm doing the wrong thing. In a lot of ways, it can be viewed as a black and white moral perspective, but really in terms of superheroes, it fits because there's good guys and there's bad guys, and there's no moral ambiguity there. That's one of the things I always loved about the golden age of superheroes in terms of how they were drawn, especially drawn by Alex Ross in terms of how their stories were told. I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy, you do bad things, don't care why, you're going to jail once you get caught. And then the other half of this, of course, is the Sucker Punch feel, where it focuses mostly on a femme fatale kind of cast. And so because of that, with regards to Kane's situation, kind of in this boat where she's like, look, everybody else is fighting the war and I'm just sitting around with a baseball bat, beating up bad guys and calling it a day. What this does is it creates a little bit of strife between Kane and Maggie Sawyer. Now, the reason why this is important is because of the fact that in the New 52 mainline comics, the struggle that came between Kane and Maggie Sawyer was by virtue of the fact that Kane was Batwoman. And so her life as a vigilante crime fighter in a lot of ways created problems with the relationship between herself and Maggie. This is kind of a stand-in for that. As opposed to her being a vigilante crime fighter, she's a person that has a moral imperative to fight the bad guys, presumably overseas somewhere. And so the fact that she wants to do something better, do something greater, kind of creates a little bit of strife between her and Maggie, because Maggie kind kind of feels like she's left out, right? Like Maggie looks at the situation and says, I'm your significant other, like I should be able to provide everything you need. But at the end of the day, Maggie's not able to, because Maggie cannot enable Kane to go overseas and fight. Maggie cannot bring back the days when Kane was an adventurer, when she was going around and checking all kinds of things out and touring the world and engaging in, these adventuresque scenarios. Maggie can't bring that to her. All Maggie can do is offer some small measure of peace and call it a day. But that small measure of peace that's being offered here isn't really enough. And so the wish of Kane comes to a head when they kind of receive a rude awakening with a helicopter landing on their roof. And what ends up happening is out of this helicopter steps Amanda Waller. And Amanda Waller says, how would you like to end the war? So again, this really begins the process of bringing the characters together, of really kind of aligning them. The next one focuses on Wonder Woman. The one after that, I believe, focuses on Mara, and the roster continues to expand, of course, as the stories begin to progress. But in any event, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and let me know down in the comments section how you guys feel about Bombshells. I love it. I think Bombshells, like I sat down and I was like, well, let's start reading it. And before I knew it, I was almost halfway through. I was 30 issues in and I was like, oh my God, this story is amazing. So I absolutely love Bombshells. But let me know how you guys feel about this. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.